Hi and welcome to the presentation. The title of this presentation is Design Briefs, and it's been put together to assist the students from Northumbria and the other universities to help them in preparation for writing design briefs for the GIFT project. Okay, let's begin. So I want to start with an example. Typical kind of headings you'll recognise from a design brief. If I just read out some of the headings here. Background. Satisfy the needs of lonely 40-something-year-old females. The theme, monolithic, strong but smooth. Objectives, to hit the spot and give a sweet buzz, etc., etc. So, any guesses to what this could be? You may have a certain image in your head, chocolate bar. Perhaps it's not what you expected, but that point was there to illustrate that briefs can be misleading. Our own subjective view means that we interpret things differently, and sometimes all may not be what it seems. So the point to reinforce here is clarity and kind of awareness, the key aspects in a clear brief. Again, many words and terminology you're seeing here: close or close. It's a minefield of obstacles that you have to navigate. The brief. This is a description here. Your design can only be as good as the brief you've worked from, which I think is a particularly sort of relevant quote, just to kind of reinforce the importance of it. Also has been described as a compass, especially kind of important when working in groups. If everyone knows the direction or the north, then everyone can head in that direction. The brief can be used as kind of that map, that kind of point of reference that never changes, that everyone can always refer back to and kind of give them direction. So, in terms of research activity for the GIFT project, I'm sure mood images have been collected and kind of inspiration images, but basically what you have to do at the briefing stage is to kind of turn these feelings and thoughts into articulated language. In terms of putting this down on paper in words to convey the message to a different audience. So if you look at a typical kind of project timeline, what I want to share with you here is just to illustrate that there's kind of milestones throughout projects that requires kind of a level of pulling things together, being specific, and kind of with language tying things down. So let's say, for example, milestone 1, the design brief. Before and after the design brief, you have this kind of background research, image gathering, these like fuzzy kind of cycles of activity, and then kind of at the brief you have to clarify and kind of pull it all together and kind of decide, make decisions, be concise. And then obviously after that you have the similar research up to a specification, then ideas, prototyping, and finally an evaluation. Again, it's a stage where you have to be kind of concise and pull things together. So how the brief fits into this project. Basically, if you imagine, this is kind of particularly relevant for the Northumbria students, the client, essentially the university. The university is commissioning, if you like, these students to produce a corporate gift that's representing the institution. So in effect, the Northumbria is acting as the client. So you have the design teams, the small groups, in the kind of the centre of this diagram here, and basically what they're being fed by cultural research that they're doing on their counterparts on the other side of the world. They have gift-giving research that they're doing themselves, and obviously client research about the new university, about the area. So if you see here, what happens is this design brief's being produced, passed on to essentially the user group, the people who receive this brief, who then assess it, give feedback, and feed this back into the teams, kind of for their reference and to make changes, evolve the brief, and kind of make it a bit more appropriate. So essentially that's how the brief is fitting into this process. So again, the content of the briefs for the Northumbria students, you kind of have a lot of inspiration, a lot of info to kind of guide you. That is client research, cultural research, and gift giving. So obviously there's certain themes and other kind of aspects that you may want to build into these briefs, but you have a very good starting point, which is, all of what have just been mentioned, to feed in and to kind of give some structure. So you may ask, why even have a brief? Why is it so important? Perhaps we should just start and just kind of get on with things, but really, when you're kind of working in teams, common understanding is what you need, and you need to specify what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, and more importantly, when. Deadlines and timing. I think also a very important aspect is defining the expectations and the objectives. So what you're hoping to do, kind of the expected outcomes, the expected involvement, the scope, and things like that. And then later in the process, the brief, a good brief is going to maintain that direction and keep you grounded. And it could obviously serve as a benchmark against which you can kind of test and evaluate your concepts. Have we fulfilled the brief? Have we done what we set out to do? Have we solved the problem? Have we, addressed the issues? So why is it important now at this moment? Well, the GIF project, you need to write a statement of intent. Let your counterparts know what you'll do, what you intend to do. You also need to describe the boundaries, and you need to agree as a team upon kind of a direction and various aspects before moving forwards. It's particularly important that input from 3-4 team members to actually agree that and to get that clarified and set down and agreed, so everybody knows exactly where they're at and what they're doing. I think in communicating your intentions as well, in order to gain kind of feedback from the receivers, your counterparts. A very clear kind of outline of what you intend to do makes giving feedback very easy, so that'll really pay off in terms of making your job easy, kind of receiving that feedback and acting upon it. So really, I think just to reinforce, being clear and making decisions. I think this decision thing is particularly important. Again, agreeing to things and committing as a group. And really, if you imagine this brief, within industry, you'd agree a brief with a client, and that's kind of the contract you kind of set down. It's quite a formal agreement that you make. So in effect, this project should be exactly the same. You're agreeing information, and you're kind of making an agreement and a kind of a tie with your counterparts. So in terms of producing a brief, I think being creative. Obviously, we've all got skills at our disposal as a designer. We don't necessarily have to stick to a kind of formatted text, kind of documented form. Just imagine yourself on the other end of it, receiving your brief. If you receive 5 pages of solid text, I think you need to be kind of very direct, to the point, concise, upfront, tell them what the project's all about, kind of inspire the audience, and just put yourself in that position, receiving it for the first time, completely in the cold, and kind of how does it read, and kind of is it exciting, does it kind of warrant even taking place, does it, is it a good project? So in terms of format, choose a format that works for you, that's going to work for your group. Videos, storyboards, kind of face-to-face or over Skype, whatever you want, whatever kind of suits, whatever fits. Perhaps it's just a template of text. That's quite acceptable for that. I think just kind of playing it by ear, reading the situation and deciding what's going to work best. Finding a balance in a brief, being open enough to inspire the ideas, but also specific enough to feel that the brief's workable. For example, a one-word brief is going to make things very, very difficult. Again, open to interpretation. It isn't particularly clear. It'll be very challenging to kind of unpick what it really means. But again, don't be too specific. Cutting out all of that scope is going to make for a really boring project, and to be honest, very difficult to gain feedback from your counterparts, from your partners. Just absolutely no room for manoeuvre. It just kind of sets a bit of a kind of slow mood, and a bit of a people aren't going to be very engaged with it. And again, you're writing your own briefs, which is quite a unique position to be in. But it's not an excuse to make it easy for yourselves. I'd really encourage you to kind of push the boundaries, experiment, but at the same time, don't make it too difficult for yourselves. So you may be familiar with briefs. I'm sure you've worked on a lot of briefs over the past year or two. For the GIF project, for example, the target audience, you need to consider how is it appropriate for the receiver, for the target audience. It's obvious. These headings are pretty obvious. The context, how it will be presented, in which context. It may be that you choose a theme. It may be just you arrive at the university and hand it over in a formal way. Or could it be you're visiting a family of somebody or something like that. So consider that kind of context, and obviously that'll influence the kind of the outcome a lot. The cost and value, perceived value, as well as cost in terms of actually physically making this gift or producing it, or kind of however it becomes to be, whether it's a product or whether it's an animation, etc. There's this cost and time constraints, and things like wider contexts are quite important. Will the gift fit in a suitcase? Is it tangible? Is it actually a gift? Is it really kind of fulfill the expectations of people? So remember, the criteria you're setting out in your brief is going to be used to evaluate and assess your final ideas. So it's vitally important that you kind of set a brief that you're able to fulfill in order to gain credit for the assessment stages. That's again, you're in the position where you're writing your own briefs, so you kind of, the ball's in your court really. So this is why I would stress it's particularly important to write a good brief. So before you send the brief, I would advise just taking a step back and just consider, what are the values that you've chosen to convey? Do these kind of add up? Do these match? Is it appropriate? And are these values coming through in the brief? It may be a really good activity just to swap briefs between groups. Just ask somebody, read this quickly. Does this, it's very easy face to face to explain to somebody in a very different scenario with, you're not working across a language barrier. So you need to imagine that the people who receive this, perhaps English isn't their first language. They may, if you're using kind of slang language, colloquial language, there's just so many kind of little margins for error that could kind of make this brief be misinterpreted and kind of not hit the kind of nail on the head. I think that's very important. So yeah, take a step back and just kind of one last pass before you send it. And just really to reiterate that kind of change, you've all probably had experiences of projects that change, and change will happen. You write the brief and kind of, okay, it's an initial starting point, and change is natural, for numerous reasons. It could be, you might have somebody in your group who's kind of leading the direction at the start, and they take a step back and things change, and situations with your recipients, and it could be the economic climate, it could be natural disasters, anything. But what you need to try and act as kind of professionally as you can, and any big changes you need to negotiate with your client, your receivers of the brief, your recipient, not client, your receivers. So be aware of that. I think huge changes in direction kind of leave everyone feeling a little bit confused and a bit lost. So just be aware of that. Okay, further reading around the design brief area, there's actually a book by Peter Phillips called Creating the Perfect Design Brief. Gives some very, very clear kind of information, headings, and kind of instructions about how to produce a brief. And also the Design Council actually endorsed this book, but they've also done their own research, and they have some PDFs that can be viewed on the Design Council website just by simply searching Design Brief on the home page. Okay, thanks for listening. Hopefully that'll be useful and give you a helping hand when writing your briefs. I'm happy to assist anyone further or answer any questions. My email address is just there on the screen to see. It's daniel.j.i.reed@unn.ac.uk. Okay, thanks for listening, and good luck.